The thick mist rolled across the fields near Aracourt on September 19, 1944, turning the French countryside into a grey, suffocating shroud. First Lieutenant Morwin Maston of the 37th Tank Battalion stood with one hand gripping the cold steel rim of his Sherman's turret, his eyes scanning the murky landscape ahead. Inside the tank, his gunner pressed his face against the periscope, searching through the fog-laden terrain for any sign of movement. The crews had been thoroughly warned about what lurked out there in this mist. The Panthers. Those formidable German tanks with their sloped armor had become almost legendary among American tankers, machines that seemed to shrug off the shells the Shermans could fire at them. But neither Maston nor his men understood the full significance of what sat loaded in their ammunition racks. 6 rounds. 6 rounds that would fundamentally change how armored warfare would be fought from this moment forward. These were M93 high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, each one packed with a tungsten carbide core, a material so dense, so unforgiving, that it could transform their ordinary Sherman into something German tankers would learn to respect and fear. This ammunition would do more than just penetrate steel. It would crack the myth of Panther invincibility that had grown up around the American crews. It would force German commanders to completely rethink what they believed about American tank capabilities. Yet this story did not begin on these fog-shrouded French fields. The real beginning happened thousands of miles away, in the laboratories, testing grounds, and industrial facilities scattered across America. There, metallurgists and ballistic engineers had been racing against the clock, working to solve a problem that threatened to unravel everything the American armor program had achieved in Europe. The problem had first become apparent in the early months of 1944, and it was one the Army's planners had somehow failed to anticipate. The M4 Sherman, the tank that formed the backbone of every American armored division, was meeting German tanks it simply could not defeat head-on. The Panther was Germany's response to the Soviet T-34, a marriage of firepower and protection that American designers had not adequately prepared for. Its 75mm high-velocity gun was formidable, certainly, but the real problem lay in its armor. An 80mm glacis plate, angled back at 55 degrees, created an effective armor thickness of roughly 140mm, thickness that shrugged off American tank shells as if they were pebbles. American military intelligence had gotten the numbers badly wrong. They had predicted only a handful of these machines would appear. Instead, hundreds of them showed up. By June 1944, when the Allies crashed ashore in Normandy, 38% of all German tanks in the theater were Panthers. Not a few, not the token few. But hundreds of these advanced machines, many crewed by inexperienced soldiers, yet protected by armor that American tank guns could not crack from the front at any realistic combat range. The 75mm M3 gun that equipped most Sherman tanks in Normandy could not penetrate that sloped glacis. The shells would strike the plate and bounce away, leaving the Sherman's crew helplessly exposed, while the Panther's gun, deadly accurate and powerful, could reach out and destroy a Sherman from over 2,000 meters away. Even the improved 76mm M1 gun, which had begun reaching units in July 1944, found itself struggling against the Panther's protection. Firing the standard M62 armor-piercing capped rounds, the 76mm could punch through 109mm of armor at 1,000 meters when fired dead straight. Against most German tanks, that would have been enough. The Panzer IV would fall, many German assault guns would fall. But the Panther's sloped frontal armor remained stubbornly, effectively immune to this standard ammunition. The 76mm had one weak point it could exploit: the Panther's gun mantlet, that thick casting of steel that housed the gun. But hitting it reliably meant closing to within 100 meters, sometimes less. At those distances, the Panther's superior firepower transformed the engagement from a gunnery duel into a suicide run. The real problem, as it turned out, was not the gun itself, but what that gun was firing. The story of how the 76mm had arrived in Europe was itself a saga of bureaucratic foot-dragging and belated recognition of how serious things had become. The first Shermans, equipped with the 76mm M1 gun, rolled off the production lines in January 1944. 130 of these improved tanks, the M4A176 variant, landed in Britain on April 10, 1944, shipped over in preparation for the invasion. Yet despite their presence, despite having them already in theatre, American commanders refused to commit them to the Normandy landings on D-Day. The reasons seemed logical at the time. Crews needed more training on the new gun system. Supply lines were already stretched thin, and maintaining two different types of ammunition seemed like an invitation to logistical chaos. Most of all, the commanders believed, or convinced themselves to believe, that the 75mm gun would be sufficient for whatever German tanks they would encounter. That belief would cost lives. By early July 1944, reports began flowing back from Normandy, and what they described was grim. Tank crews were encountering machines they could not kill. By July 2nd, complaints about the 75mm's inability to defeat German armor had reached General Dwight Eisenhower himself. His reaction, captured in multiple historical records, revealed the frustration boiling over at the highest levels of command. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out?" he demanded. "I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." His full statement, as witnesses recorded it, contained considerably stronger language, expressing his anger that the Ordnance Department had assured him the 76mm would handle anything the Germans put in front of him. On July 12, 1944, a board convened to officially determine what tank crews had already learned through bitter experience. Standard American weapons could not defeat Panthers from the front. General Omar Bradley moved immediately, ordering 76mm Shermans rushed from Britain to the front lines. On July 25, 1944, during Operation Cobra, 102 M4A1, 76 tanks made their combat debut. The reports that came back were sobering. The 76mm was certainly better than the 75mm. But at the ranges where tank battles actually happened, it still could not reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. Sherman crews quickly discovered they had to find flank shots or try to hit the gun mantlet at close range, neither of which was a winning strategy when facing a tank that could reach out and destroy you from a kilometer away. The answer came from physics and materials science. By July 1944, American ordnance engineers had developed what they called the T4 round, later standardized and renamed the M93 HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition. This was something fundamentally different from conventional armor-piercing rounds. The round consisted of a tungsten carbide core, one of the hardest substances available, wrapped in a lightweight aluminum body with a ballistic windshield shape to cut through air more efficiently. This design did something elegant. It concentrated all the projectile's kinetic energy into a smaller, denser penetrator while reducing the overall weight. The result was striking. The M93 round left the muzzle at 1,036 meters per second, compared to 792 meters per second for the standard M62 round. That extra 244 meters per second translated directly into penetrating power. At 1,000 yards, roughly 914 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at 10 degrees of obliquity, according to the official testing data from the War Department. Against the Panther's gun mantlet, with its curved 100mm casting of steel on the early SSF-D and A variants, or the thicker 120mm mantlet on later models, this meant reliable penetration from distances up to 1,000 meters instead of point-blank range. The gun mantlet suddenly became a viable target. Sherman crews no longer faced the choice between impossible long-range engagements or suicidal close-range charges. They had an option. But developing HVAP ammunition solved only half the equation. Getting it produced in sufficient quantities was an entirely different challenge. The T4 round depended on tungsten carbide, a strategic material that had to be imported, primarily from China, which produced 36% of the world's tungsten supply before the war. Tungsten was desperately needed everywhere throughout American industry. Machine tools required it. Armor plate hardening required it. Multiple calibers of armor-piercing ammunition needed it. Industrial processes of all kinds competed for limited supplies. American demand for HVAP ammunition alone consumed hundreds of metric tons every year. A single 76mm HVAP round contained roughly 0.8 kilograms of tungsten carbide. That meant one Sherman tank carrying 6 rounds needed nearly 5 kilograms of this scarce material. China had produced approximately 10,000 metric tons of tungsten concentrates in 1944, but that had to supply every Allied application across the entire war effort. The United States tried to make up the shortfall with domestic production from limited deposits in Colorado, Nevada, and California, but total availability remained severely constrained. Germany's situation was far worse. Swedish tungsten imports were drying up as the war turned against the Reich, and domestic German production remained minimal. By 1945, German factories were desperately scrounging for tungsten to keep aircraft engine machine tools running. Panther crews received only standard ammunition. American ordnance had been experimenting with HVAP projectiles since spring 1942, but serious production at scale did not begin until after Normandy made clear just how severe the Panther problem actually was. In July 1944, production of 3-inch HVAP rounds for tank destroyers reached 1,000 rounds. August produced the first 1,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP. September yielded another 1,700 rounds. Not until November 1944 did monthly production climb to 5,000 rounds for the 76mm, then ramping up to 7,000 per month by January 1945. By March 1945, roughly 33,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP had rolled off American production lines, a significant industrial achievement, yet still a fraction of what was truly needed. The numbers told a harsh story about how scarce this ammunition really was. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman operating in Europe had received exactly 5 HVAP rounds. 5 rounds to face an enemy deploying Panthers as the standard tank in Panzer divisions. A Sherman company fielding 17 tanks would possess 85 HVAP rounds total. A German unit might field 30 or more Panthers. The first HVAP rounds arrived in the European theatre in August 1944, but their arrival hardly caused celebration. Broader tactical problems were crushing American armor at the moment. The Norman hedgerows had forced American tanks into claustrophobic close-quarters fighting, where German ambush tactics worked perfectly. German commanders had learned to position Panthers in hull-down positions, exposing only the heavily armored turret while keeping the vulnerable hull hidden behind terrain. German doctrine emphasized first-shot advantage. Panthers would wait in prepared positions, letting Sherman columns approach until the Germans could fire from ranges where American return fire could not reach them effectively. The effect on American tank crews was psychological devastation. They nicknamed the Sherman the Ronson lighter, claiming it ignited every time. Though post-war analysis would show this reputation for spontaneous combustion was exaggerated, the perception shaped how men behaved. Tank commanders who spotted Panthers would often call for artillery or air support rather than engage directly, surrendering the initiative to an enemy who could be beaten if American tankers had the right ammunition and the right tactics. HVAP rounds began slowly changing this calculation, but the change was hampered by the scarcity of ammunition and by inadequate training on what these rounds could and could not do. The first widespread combat test of HVAP ammunition would not come in Normandy's hedgerows, but in the open country of Lorraine, where American armor had broken through into terrain that favored aggressive armored tactics. By September 1944, Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army was deep in France, racing toward the German border with supply lines stretched dangerously thin. The 4th Armored Division, one of the most effective American armored formations, had advanced aggressively, seizing a bridgehead over the Moselle River near Aricourt. German High Command recognized the danger immediately. If Patton's armor reached the Rhine and crossed into Germany proper, the industrial heart of the Rhineland would lie exposed and vulnerable. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army received orders to counterattack, to destroy the American bridgehead, and to push Patton's advance back. The German force assembled for this offensive included 2 newly formed panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, equipped primarily with Panthers, fresh from German factories. On paper, German advantage looked overwhelming. The 2 brigades together fielded approximately 150 tanks facing Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, which had roughly 50 Sherman tanks. The 113th Panzer Brigade alone entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns combined, including 42 Panthers and 40 Panzer IVs. German planners anticipated quick victory. Panther technical superiority should be enough to overcome any American advantages in logistics or air support. They were badly mistaken. The Battle of Araucourt, fought across 11 days from September 18 to 29, would become the largest tank engagement fought by American forces until the Battle of the Bulge. More importantly, it would prove that American tank crews, when properly trained and properly equipped, could defeat technically superior German armor through superior tactics, combined arms coordination, and the judicious use of high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition. The morning of September 19th opened with heavy fog blanketing the rolling terrain around Araucourt. German reconnaissance was severely limited. The Panzer brigades, lacking proper scouting units, advanced into terrain held by American forces without clear visibility, moving essentially blind into positions where Americans knew the ground and had established defensive locations. Around 8 a.m., elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated American outposts east and south of Araucourt. The German tanks, factory-fresh Panthers, crewed by inexperienced soldiers, moved forward in column formation, a tactical error that veteran American tankers immediately recognized and exploited. Captain Kenneth R. Lameson's C Company of the 37th Tank Battalion held positions along the key approaches to Araucourt. His Sherman crews had been briefed on the HVAP rounds carried in their ammunition racks, 6 rounds per tank. The instruction had been direct: use them wisely, save them for Panther turrets or mantlets at ranges where the velocity remained sufficient for penetration. The fog that had hindered German reconnaissance now became an American asset. A section of Lameson's Sherman tanks held positions just south of the village when something emerged from the thick fog. A Panther tank materialized like a ghost, barely 75 meters away. At that distance, all the German tanks' celebrated long-range advantages became worthless. The American gunner didn't hesitate. His hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this countless times. The shot went downrange instantly. The HVAP round screamed through the air at over 1,000 meters per second. It struck the Panther's gun mantlet with tremendous force. The tungsten carbide projectile punched straight through the curved cast steel like it was paper, then continued deeper into the tank's interior where ammunition sat waiting beneath the gun breech. Everything detonated at once. The explosion was catastrophic. The Panther's turret lifted slightly from the sheer violence of the secondary blast, then crashed back down onto the hull. Flames poured from every opening as smoke rolled across the fog-shrouded landscape. 2 more Panthers came out of the mist almost immediately after. They moved with the confidence of crews who'd never faced anything they couldn't handle. It didn't matter. Both tanks were destroyed within seconds. Their crews never got a meaningful chance to fight back. The fog worked against them, limiting visibility and preventing effective targeting, while the Americans knew exactly where to aim. The surviving German tanks turned away from the engagement. Their crews were shaken, confused. They'd been assured repeatedly that they were superior to anything the Americans fielded. They'd been told Sherman tanks were inadequate, vulnerable, easy prey. 3 Panzers had just been annihilated in moments by the very tanks they'd been taught to dismiss. Throughout the morning of September 19th, similar firefights erupted across the Araucourt sector. American tanks used the fog as a concealing veil, emerging from it to strike German armor at ranges where HVAP rounds performed their lethal magic. Then they'd fade back into the mist before German crews could organize a coordinated response. The German tactical approach became a liability. Advancing in column formation without adequate reconnaissance, Panther crews repeatedly exposed their thinner side armor to American flanking attacks. They were moving as if they owned the ground. Near the command post at Araucourt, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers sat waiting. These machines carried 76mm guns loaded with HVAP ammunition, and they proved absolutely devastating in the close-range, fog-choked combat. The Hellcats moved with the speed and precision of trained killers. Their crews had one job, and they executed it flawlessly. By midday, as the fog finally began to lift, American forward artillery observers could coordinate their fire with the tank companies holding defensive positions. Everything changed when the P-47 Thunderbolts arrived overhead. Fighters from the 405th Fighter Group dove through breaks in the clouds, pouring rockets and machine gun fire down onto German armor columns below. American advantages crystallized in those hours. Yes, the Panther was superior as an individual weapon system. Its armor was thicker, its gun was more powerful, its engine was better. But American forces didn't fight like individual weapon systems. They fought using combined arms doctrine as standard operating procedure. German tanks attacked without adequate artillery support behind them, without air cover above them, without infantry to clear out American defensive positions ahead of them. American forces married armor with artillery, with air power, with infantry, with tank destroyers, all working as an integrated whole. It was a system designed to overwhelm whatever the Germans threw at it. When Panthers encountered these prepared defenses, they got destroyed piecemeal despite their superior specifications on paper. HVAP ammunition didn't make Shermans equal to Panthers in the technical sense, but real warfare doesn't get fought according to technical specifications. Tanks get destroyed by experienced crews who find and exploit weaknesses under actual combat conditions. The Panther's gun mantlet, necessary for the 75mm gun to elevate and traverse, created a vulnerability. The junction between turret and hull, the thin side armor, the engine deck, all of these represented targets that Sherman tanks with HVAP could now successfully engage at combat ranges that would have been suicidal just weeks earlier. What cut deeper than the tactical losses was the psychological damage. German crews discovered something terrifying. Their tanks weren't invulnerable anymore. Panther crews had been trained, conditioned, told repeatedly that their armor couldn't be penetrated frontally by American fire. The briefings had been emphatic on this point. Sherman guns simply weren't powerful enough. As long as you kept the front facing the enemy, you were safe, invulnerable, untouchable. Then the first Panther commanders watched Sherman rounds punch through their mantlets and detonate the ammunition inside their own tanks. The survivors who made it back to German lines carried that knowledge with them like a disease spreading through the ranks. American tanks possessed ammunition that could kill Panthers. The myth of invulnerability had been shattered. By afternoon on September 19th, German tank commanders were submitting reports to headquarters claiming that American Shermans had new, more powerful ammunition. The reports were confused and contradictory. Some officers insisted the Americans had secretly deployed tank destroyers with 90mm guns. Others claimed the British had given American units the 17-pounder Firefly tanks. The actual truth was more troubling to German military planners than any of these theories. American industry had developed specialized ammunition that significantly reduced the Panther's armor advantage. That meant American manufacturing could respond to tactical problems faster than German industry could develop counters. It meant American industrial capacity outpaced German capacity. That realization cut to the heart of German strategic concerns. The fighting ground on through September 22nd, when the major German offensive operations finally ran out of steam and stalled. American forces had destroyed or disabled approximately 86 German tanks and assault guns. American losses totaled 25 Sherman tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The kill ratio was heavily skewed in America's favor, despite the individual tank performance disadvantage on paper. The Battle of Aracourt represented far more than a tactical victory. It was a psychological turning point. American tank crews learned that they could defeat Panthers without waiting for specialized tank destroyers or overwhelming air support. They could do it with skill, coordination, and the right ammunition. German crews lost their psychological foundation of believing in absolute frontal invulnerability. The German perspective was one of stunned confusion and bitter recriminations. The 113th Panzer Brigade had entered the battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns. By September 29th, they could scrape together fewer than 20 operational vehicles. German after-action reports struggled to explain what had happened. The Panthers' technical superiority was undeniable on paper. How had inexperienced crews in newly produced tanks been defeated so completely, so thoroughly? Answers emerged only when commanders looked beyond tank specifications. Training and experience mattered enormously. The Panzer Brigade crews had minimal training, often arriving at the front with just weeks of instruction behind them. American tank crews in the 4th Armored Division were veterans. They'd fought across France. They understood combined arms warfare instinctively. They'd learned to read terrain and identify tactical advantages. Experience showed, but training alone didn't fully explain the Panther losses, especially those penetrations that shouldn't have happened with standard American ammunition. German intelligence officers examining destroyed Panthers found entry holes smaller than expected. The holes looked wrong. They suggested a sub-caliber projectile, something exotic. Examination of unexploded rounds recovered near disabled tanks revealed the truth. Americans had deployed tungsten core ammunition. The discovery had profound strategic implications. Germany itself had developed similar ammunition, the Panzergranate 40, which used tungsten core to improve penetration capabilities. But German tungsten supplies were critically limited by late 1944. Production priorities focused on machine tools rather than ammunition. If Americans could field specialized tungsten core ammunition in sufficient quantities to distribute to frontline tank units, it demonstrated industrial capacity and resource access that Germany simply couldn't match. American tanks weren't just more numerous and better supported logistically. They now possessed ammunition that partially negated Germany's carefully engineered technical armor advantages. The impact of HVAP extended far beyond Arakort's immediate tactical results. As word spread through American armored units that the new ammunition could defeat Panthers under favorable conditions, tank crews became more willing to engage German armor directly. The psychological paralysis that had gripped some units during difficult Normandy fighting began to evaporate. Crews still respected Panther capabilities. They weren't foolish. But helplessness had been replaced with hope. This shift in morale proved crucial for subsequent operations. Crews that believed they could fight sought advantageous positions. They took calculated risks. They engaged aggressively. Crews that believed they were outmatched hesitated, ceding initiative to the enemy. HVP ammunition, though in incredibly short supply, gave American tankers a weapon, allowing them to fight Panthers on more nearly equal terms. Even crews that never fired an HVAP round benefited psychologically, knowing the ammunition existed and might be available when needed most. Commanders faced difficult prioritization decisions with limited HVAP supply. Tank destroyers received preferential allocation since their primary mission was anti-tank combat. Sherman tanks, forced to balance supporting infantry while engaging armor, often received fewer rounds despite encountering enemy tanks more frequently. This created operational tension between tactical requirements and supply realities. The allocation system stretched across multiple command levels, from army down to battalion, creating inefficiencies throughout. Some units received more HVAP than they could immediately use. Others exhausted their supply within days and received nothing, despite sending urgent requests up the chain. When German forces launched their surprise offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, American tank units faced renewed intense pressure. The Battle of the Bulge deployed hundreds of Panthers and Tigers in winter conditions, favoring defensive fighting and limiting Allied air operations due to poor weather. American Sherman crews relied heavily on their scarce HVAP ammunition to engage German heavy armor. Shortages became critical within days of heavy fighting. Some units completely exhausted their HVAP supply and found resupply requests going unfulfilled as logistical networks struggled through snow-blocked roads disrupted by German advances. Yet even in the difficult Ardennes fighting, American forces demonstrated that tactical skill and combined arms coordination compensated for technical disadvantage. Tank crews coordinated closely with infantry, using bazooka teams to disable Panthers from close range, while Shermans provided covering fire. Artillery forward observers called in time-on-target missions that damaged optics, disabled tracks, and killed exposed crew members, even when shells couldn't penetrate armor. Air support, finally coming in late December and January when weather permitted, proved devastatingly effective against German armor concentrated on approach roads. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armored forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in an offensive that failed to reach its objectives. By early 1945, the strategic picture had shifted decisively and irreversibly in Allied favor. American and British forces prepared to cross the Rhine. Soviet armies advanced from the east, having shattered German defensive lines in massive winter offensives. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing. Strategic bombing pounded factories relentlessly. Lost territory meant lost critical resources and manufacturing facilities. Severe shortages of raw materials, including fuel and tungsten, crippled production. Panther production, which had reached 3,900 units in 1944, fell sharply in early 1945 as factories were bombed, transportation networks disrupted, and raw materials became unavailable. When Panthers were produced, fuel shortages often kept them immobilized. German tank units in the final months frequently abandoned tanks, not from combat damage, but because they had no fuel to operate them. The technical limitations of HVAP, while less publicized than its successes, deserve examination for historical accuracy. The tungsten carbide core, excellent at penetrating armor under favorable conditions, was inherently brittle. Below certain impact velocities, approximately 2,300 to 2,500 feet per second, the core could shatter on contact rather than penetrating. HVAP effectiveness declined significantly at longer ranges where velocity had decreased. Effective range against Panther mantlets was approximately 1,000 meters. Beyond that distance, the probability of the core shattering on impact increased substantially. American tankers learned these limitations through combat experience, sometimes tragically. Crews that fired HVAP at Panthers beyond effective range wasted scarce ammunition and often provoked return fire from German guns that remained effective at much longer ranges. Training on proper HVAP employment was frequently minimal, as ammunition arrived at frontline units faster than training materials could be developed. Tank crews across the European theater learned through hard experience how to use HVAP ammunition effectively when it finally reached them in combat. What happened on November 20, 1944, became a textbook example of both HVAP's remarkable capabilities and its genuine limitations. Sergeant Francis Baker commanded a Sherman fitted with a 76mm gun, and his rounds were loaded with the precious tungsten cord ammunition. When a Panther appeared roughly 800 yards away, Baker's gunner had his chance. The gunner squeezed off round after round, at least 7 shots fired in quick succession. Observers watched the impact strike the Panther's side armor repeatedly. Yet the rounds behaved unexpectedly. They bounced off the sloped armor as if the tank wore invisible protection. Round after round failed to penetrate, and Baker watched in frustration as his most advanced ammunition proved inadequate against the German design. The engagement revealed a stark truth. HVAP was powerful, but it was not invincible, particularly when striking armor at unfavorable angles. The Panther ultimately withdrew from the fight rather than press the engagement further. So the encounter wasn't entirely tactically unsuccessful. However, Baker's experience sent a clear message through the Sherman crews. HVAP gave them better options than before, but it wasn't a silver bullet. Success still demanded the same fundamentals that had always mattered in tank warfare: proper positioning, accurate shooting, understanding range correctly, and finding angles that gave projectiles the best chance of penetration. The ammunition improved their odds significantly, but skill and judgment remained absolutely essential. When military analysts examined captured Panther tanks and test-fired HVAP ammunition after the war, they discovered nuanced results. The ammunition worked devastatingly well against specific targets on the Panther. The gun mantlet presented a vulnerable zone that HVAP could reliably penetrate at ranges up to 1,000 meters. Hits on the mantlet typically produced catastrophic secondary explosions that destroyed the tank. The glasses plate, the thick armored block protecting the scope, told a different story entirely. There, penetration proved difficult except at extremely close range, and only when projectiles struck at sharp angles. The problem lay in physics and geometry combined. The extreme slope of German armor meant that high-velocity tungsten projectiles often ricocheted violently or shattered upon impact rather than punching through. This fundamental reality forced Sherman crews to continue relying on maneuver and positioning. They needed to find ways to flank Panthers when possible, refusing to remain trapped in unfavorable head-to-head confrontations. HVAP didn't make Sherman tanks equal to Panthers in any technical sense, but it provided something equally valuable: a genuine fighting chance in situations where American crews previously faced almost certain defeat. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, gave HVAP ammunition its second major combat test. American Sherman tanks, now primarily the upgraded M4A3E8 variant equipped with 76 mm guns, encountered Soviet-supplied T-34-85 tanks fielded by North Korean and Chinese forces. A critical difference now existed compared to European fighting. Tungsten supplies were no longer strangled by competing wartime demands. American ordnance officers had access to substantial stocks of HVAP ammunition that could be distributed more freely to units that needed it. American tank crews in Korea discovered that HVAP rounds penetrated T-34-85 armor with remarkable ease at the ranges typical of combat engagements. The Soviet tank, while competent for its design, carried substantially thinner armor protection than the Panther had. Its 90 mm thick turret front crumbled against tungsten-cored projectiles fired from 76 mm guns. The 45 mm thick glasses plate provided virtually no meaningful protection either. The results validated everything American tankers had learned in Europe, but now applied against armor even less capable of resisting the ammunition. Sherman tanks in Korea achieved remarkably lopsided exchange ratios against communist armor, and while superior crew training certainly contributed to these successes, the abundant availability of HVAP ammunition played a decisive supporting role. For veterans of the brutal European campaign, Korea's results proved bittersweet. The same ammunition that could have transformed their earlier battles, but had been rationed and restricted, now sat in plentiful supply. If only HVAP had been more available in 1944 and early 1945, they thought, how many American lives might have been saved? German military professionals who survived the war and underwent interrogation by American officers revealed something noteworthy: grudging professional respect mixed with deep frustration regarding American HVAP ammunition. German ordnance specialists recognized that American industry had genuinely solved the tungsten core ammunition problem more effectively than German manufacturers had managed. Despite Germany having invented the underlying technology first, the Germans had developed their own tungsten ammunition, the Panzer Granit 40 series. But production shortfalls meant these rounds remained perpetually scarce and never achieved meaningful distribution to frontline units. American HVAP production, while also constrained by tungsten availability, still exceeded German capacity substantially by late 1944. German tank crews who survived and later described their experiences frequently mentioned American ammunition improvements as a significant complication in their tactical situation. Knowing that Sherman tanks could penetrate Panther mantlets at combat distances meant German crews could no longer rely on frontal armor for assured protection. This forced them to adjust tactics fundamentally. German tankers became more cautious, advancing more slowly, and depending increasingly on defensive positions rather than aggressive maneuvering. Yet defensive warfare surrendered the initiative to American forces, who responded by deploying combined arms tactics that systematically negated German advantages. The erosion of German confidence as their armor appeared more vulnerable contributed to the increasingly cautious mindset that came to characterize German armored operations during 1945. Once they recognized their tanks could be defeated frontally, German commanders fought from ever more defensive postures. When German engineers examined HVAP projectiles recovered from destroyed German tanks, they found themselves studying a technically elegant solution. The tungsten carbide core, surrounded by sections of lightweight aluminum, represented efficient engineering that maximized penetrating power while using tungsten sparingly. The lighter carrier body allowed factories to achieve higher muzzle velocities without subjecting gun barrels to excessive wear. The dense tungsten core retained its kinetic energy far more effectively over distance than steel-based penetrators could. German ordnance specialists immediately recognized these advantages. yet found themselves incapable of responding with comparable developments. By late 1944, German tank and ammunition production had become entirely absorbed with maintaining output of existing designs. Developing new ammunition types seemed like an impossible luxury when factories faced constant air attack and production was already struggling. The Panther's 75mm KWK gun already delivered excellent penetrating power against Allied tanks using standard ammunition, so developing improved German rounds didn't seem like the highest priority compared to simply keeping factories producing what they already made. New ammunition would have consumed tungsten Germany desperately needed elsewhere and would have demanded factory retooling that simply wasn't feasible. German tanks entered their final year of fighting armed with ammunition designs created in 1942 and 1943, while American ammunition continued its steady evolution. This disparity, though smaller in scope than many other material advantages, nonetheless represented the collision between German technical excellence and American industrial capacity. The historical significance of the Battle of Araucourt extended far beyond the immediate tactical results of that single engagement. The battle proved conclusively that American armored doctrine, centered on mobility, combined arms coordination, superior logistics, and overwhelming material production, could consistently defeat German methods that depended primarily on superior individual tank performance. German commanders had organized their 1944 Panzer brigades around the Panther's technical capabilities, betting that armor protection and firepower would compensate for inexperienced crews and limited support elements. This assumption collapsed catastrophically. The lesson became unmistakable to military observers on both sides. Technical excellence in weapon design certainly mattered and provided real advantages, yet operational excellence in combined arms warfare, superior logistics, and better training ultimately determined success in actual combat. The best tank meant nothing if crews received inadequate training, if logistic lines couldn't supply ammunition and fuel, or if armored units lacked infantry and air support coordination. For American tank crews personally, HVAP held significance beyond technical specifications and penetration statistics. When crews who had faced Panthers with only standard ammunition during the bitter fighting around Normandy finally received HVAP rounds, they experienced something precious: tangible hope. The ammunition didn't eliminate the Panther threat entirely, but it provided a tool that offered reasonable chances of penetration under favorable circumstances. This psychological shift produced measurable improvements in performance and encouraged more aggressive tactics. For German tankers, the situation reversed. Knowledge that American tanks now posed a credible frontal threat fundamentally altered their entire approach to engagement. The famous German tank ace Otto Carius, who commanded Tiger tanks and lived through the war, later wrote extensively about this psychological dynamic in his memoirs. He described how the sense of invulnerability that thick armor provided became absolutely crucial to crew morale and willingness to fight aggressively. When that invulnerability evaporated, when crews realized American shells could punch through what had seemed impenetrable, crew performance inevitably suffered. Panther crews now understood that their mantlets represented known vulnerabilities that competent American gunners could exploit. This knowledge made Panther crews demonstrably more hesitant, slower to initiate engagements, and markedly less willing to accept tactical risks. The strategic implications of HVAP development extended far beyond the specific technical problem of ammunition design. Both American and German research establishments employed capable engineers and possessed sophisticated understanding of ballistics and armor mechanics. Both nations recognized early that tungsten-cored ammunition offered solutions, and both developed functional designs. The critical divergence came down to industrial capacity and resource availability, rather than scientific knowledge or engineering talent. American industry could produce HVAP in quantities substantial enough to influence battlefield results meaningfully, though supply never quite reached the volumes commanders desired. German industry struggled to produce enough ammunition even for testing purposes, let alone for distributing to frontline units. This pattern repeated across countless weapon systems throughout the war. Germany frequently engineered technically superior weapons that simply never could be manufactured in adequate quantities to affect strategic outcomes. American industry produced less sophisticated but highly effective equipment in overwhelming quantities. The M4 Sherman was objectively not the finest tank World War II produced when measured by pure technical standards, but American factories produced approximately 49,324 of them, compared to roughly 6,132 Panthers that Germany managed. An 8-to-1 production advantage, combined with ammunition improvements like HVAP that reduced the technical gap, proved strategically decisive. Quantity backed by adequate logistics ultimately overwhelmed quality that couldn't be supported or sustained. The post-war careers of officers who fought at Aracourt and other engagements reflect the enduring influence these combat experiences exerted on military thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion at Aracourt with distinction and went on to become United States Army Chief of Staff. His name would grace the M1 Abrams main battle tank. The lessons Abrams learned about combined arms coordination, the critical necessity of crew training, and the vital importance of adequate ammunition directly influenced his entire career and shaped the doctrine he helped develop. The M1 Abrams was deliberately designed with a powerful 120mm smoothbore gun and sophisticated ammunition types, including depleted uranium penetrators, serving functionally identical roles to what HVAP served in World War II. German veterans who survived Panther service and later served in the West German Bundeswehr carried different but equally important lessons from their wartime experience. They had personally witnessed the tactical limitations of possessing technological superiority without the industrial base and logistic network required to support it. Bundeswehr armored doctrine during the Cold War emphasized quality and training, while explicitly acknowledging that West Germany could never match Soviet numerical superiority. However, Bundeswehr planners informed by wartime experience also prioritized ammunition effectiveness. The Leopard 1 and later Leopard 2 main battle tanks employed sophisticated ammunition designs, informed by the hard-won realization that ammunition technology and crew training mattered as much as armor protection itself. Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, ended the immediate tactical requirement for HVAP ammunition in European combat. American ordnance officers who systematically examined destroyed vehicles afterward discovered clear physical evidence of HVAP penetrations on certain wrecks, confirming the ammunition's effectiveness under favorable conditions while noting its limitations. Panthers struck by HVAP typically showed penetrations through the mantlet or turret face when projectiles hit at favorable angles, but rarely through the glacis plate, which remained highly resistant to penetration. This physical evidence validated American tactical doctrine, emphasizing flanking maneuvers and maneuvering for favorable engagement angles. Comprehensive post-war analysis concluded that while HVAP meaningfully improved Sherman capabilities against German heavy tanks, the truly decisive factors remained overwhelming numerical superiority, vastly superior logistics, complete air superiority, stronger artillery support, and more effective operational doctrine. Individual ammunition improvements, while meaningful, proved less important than systemic advantages. American tank crews transformed dramatically between mid-1944 and early 1945, reflecting cumulative combat experience, improved equipment availability, and growing familiarity with specialized ammunition, including HVAP. Crews landing in Normandy in June 1944 often felt genuine apprehension about German armor, particularly Panthers and Tigers. By early 1945, after months of relentless combat, significant training improvements, increased availability of 76mm Shermans, and growing confidence in HVAP ammunition, American tankers approached engagements with far greater confidence. This psychological transformation produced direct tactical consequences. Confident crews fought more aggressively, accepted calculated risks when opportunities appeared, and exploited tactical advantages more readily. While HVAP alone didn't create this transformation, its availability and demonstrated effectiveness contributed significantly to improved American armored force morale and tactical performance. The legacy of HVAP development continues shaping modern ammunition design today. American armored doctrine from 1945 onward consistently emphasized ammunition effectiveness as a fundamental component of tank design philosophy. Modern tank ammunition employs depleted uranium or tungsten alloy penetrators, chosen for the same density and hardness properties that made tungsten carbide effective in World War II. The underlying principle has remained constant across decades. Concentrate maximum kinetic energy into a small, extremely dense projectile traveling at the highest achievable velocity. The continuity from 1944 HVAP rounds to present-day armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot ammunition illustrates how foundational lessons from World War II continue directly influencing military technology development. Soviet and later Russian tank ammunition development independently followed remarkably similar paths, recognizing that armor-piercing capability depends fundamentally on projectile material properties and kinetic energy delivery. The entire global tank ammunition industry traces its technological roots to the HVAP experience, where engineers first proved conclusively that specialized ammunition could partially overcome armor protection advantages. September 19, 1944, when First Lieutenant American Sherman first engaged Panthers with HVAP ammunition at Aracourt, marked a genuine inflection point in the psychological balance of armored warfare. German crews who had fought confidently behind their armor learned that American tanks could pose serious frontal threats. American crews who had felt outmatched gained meaningful confidence from possessing ammunition capable of defeating Panthers under favorable circumstances. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten-cored ammunition produced in American factories, influenced every subsequent armored engagement throughout the European War. HVAP ammunition, though never available in desired quantities, provided enough improved capability to transform American tank crews from uncertain defenders into confident attackers willing to engage German armor directly. The crews who fired those first HVAP rounds in combat, watching tungsten punch through armor that had seemed invincible, demonstrated that industrial capacity and material science, intelligently applied to urgent tactical problems, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. This fundamental lesson, learned at considerable cost on European battlefields, remains directly relevant today for military planners confronting technological challenges of modern warfare.